Captain Marcus Thornfield had served the royal palace of Eldoria for 23 years. His weathered hands knew every stone of the ancient castle walls, every echo in the grand hallways. The morning sun cast long shadows across the throne room as he prepared for what should have been a routine ceremony. The kingdom of Eldoria had a tradition older than memory itself. When royalty entered the sacred throne room for official ceremonies, the palace guards would stand at attention, but they would never kneel. This tradition came from the first king of Eldoria, who declared that those who protected the crown should stand as equals in courage, never bow as servants. For 300 years, this custom had remained unbroken. Queen Saraphina had married into the royal family just 2 months ago. She came from the neighboring kingdom of Astoria, where customs were different, where guards knelt, where servants bowed low, where hierarchy was displayed through posture and position. Her emerald green eyes held intelligence, but also a determination that made Marcus uneasy. The wedding had been magnificent, the entire kingdom celebrated for days. Saraphina seemed kind to the people, generous with her smile and genuinely interested in learning about Eldoria's ways. But as weeks passed, Marcus noticed small changes. The way she spoke to servants became sharper. Her requests became commands. Her suggestions became demands. On this particular morning, the autumn air carried a chill that seemed to match the tension in the palace. Queen Saraphina had called for a special ceremony to honor her first month as queen. The throne room was decorated with golden banners and fresh flowers. Noble families from across the kingdom had gathered to witness the event. Marcus stood with his fellow guards, David, Thomas, Sarah, and Elena, all positioned around the throne room as they had countless times before. They wore their ceremonial uniforms, deep blue coats with silver buttons, polished boots, and the royal crest proudly displayed on their chests. Each guard carried a ceremonial sword, a symbol of their oath to protect the crown and the people of Eldoria. When Queen Saraphina entered, she wore a stunning purple gown that swept across the marble floor. Her crown caught the light from the crystal chandeliers above. She moved with grace and confidence, acknowledging the nobles with elegant nods. But when her eyes met Marcus's, something cold flickered in her expression. The ceremony began as planned. The royal herald announced the queen's achievements during her first month. She had established new trade agreements, improved relations with neighboring kingdoms, and started several charitable projects. The assembled nobles applauded politely. Then came the moment that would change everything. Queen Saraphina raised her hand for silence. Her voice carried clearly across the throne room. Before we conclude today's ceremony, I wish to address a matter that has troubled me since my arrival in Eldoria. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Something in her tone warned of coming trouble. In my homeland of Astoria, the queen continued, proper respect for the crown is shown through appropriate gestures of honor. I have observed that the palace guards of Eldoria do not follow this custom. Today, I request that all guards kneel when I pass, as is proper and fitting for servants of the crown. The throne room fell silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Around the room, nobles shifted uncomfortably. Some looked surprised, others worried. A few nodded in agreement, particularly those from families with connections to Astoria. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. Your Majesty, with the greatest respect, the guards of Eldoria follow a sacred tradition established by our first king. We stand as protectors, not as servants. This custom has been honored for 3 centuries. Queen Saraphina's eyes narrowed. Traditions can be changed, Captain Thornfield. I am your queen now, and I am asking for a simple gesture of respect. Your Majesty, Marcus replied carefully, our respect for the crown runs deeper than any gesture. We would gladly give our lives for Eldoria and its rulers, but kneeling would dishonor the memory of every guard who has served before us. The tension in the room grew thick as morning fog. Young David, standing near the eastern wall, looked pale and uncertain. Sarah, the newest guard, kept glancing between Marcus and the Queen. Thomas, a veteran like Marcus, stood firm with his shoulders straight and his expression neutral. Queen Saraphina's voice turned colder. "Captain Thornfield, are you refusing a direct order from your queen?" Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down on him. 300 years of tradition. The oath he had sworn to protect not just the crown, but the values and customs of Eldoria. The trust placed in him by previous kings and queens who understood the true meaning of the Guard's service. "Your Majesty, I am upholding the sacred laws and traditions of this kingdom as is my sworn duty." The Queen's face flushed with anger. "Very well, Captain. Since you choose to defy your queen in front of the entire court, you leave me no choice. You are hereby dismissed from your position, effective immediately." Gasps echoed through the throne room. Marcus felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. In 23 years of service, through 3 different monarchs, he had never faced such a situation. But as he looked around the room, he saw something that gave him strength. In the faces of his fellow guards, he saw support and understanding. In the eyes of several nobles, he saw respect for his stance. Even some of the servants watching from the doorways nodded slightly in approval. Queen Saraphina looked at the other guards. "Let Captain Thornfield's dismissal serve as a lesson. Will the rest of you now show proper respect to your queen?" The seconds stretched like hours. David looked terrified. Sarah bit her lip nervously. Thomas stood like a statue, his face revealing nothing. Marcus realized that this moment would define not just his own future, but the future of every guard who served in the palace. Would they abandon 3 centuries of honored tradition? Would they let fear overcome their oath to protect Eldoria's values? As he waited for his fellow guards to respond, Marcus knew that whatever happened next would echo through the kingdom for years to come. The morning sun continued to stream through the tall windows, but the warmth seemed to have left the throne room entirely. The silence stretched until Thomas stepped forward, his boots clicking against the marble floor. The veteran guard's gray hair caught the light as he positioned himself beside Marcus. His voice was steady and strong. "Your Majesty, I stand with Captain Thornfield. The traditions of Eldoria are not merely customs. They are the foundation of who we are as a kingdom." Sarah hesitated for only a moment before moving to stand with her fellow guards. Her young face was pale but determined. "I took an oath to protect Eldoria and its values, Your Majesty. I cannot break that oath." David remained frozen near the wall, his eyes darting between the Queen and his companions. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he struggled with the decision that would shape his future. Elena, who had been silent until now, straightened her shoulders and walked deliberately to join the others. 20 years I have served this palace," she said quietly. "I will not dishonor my service by abandoning our sacred traditions now." Queen Saraphina's face turned crimson with rage. "So be it. Guards who refuse to obey their queen have no place in this palace. You are all dismissed." From the crowd of nobles, an elderly voice spoke up. Lord Whitmore, advisor to 3 previous monarchs, stepped forward with his walking cane tapping against the floor. His white beard trembled as he spoke. "Your Majesty, with great respect, the dismissal of palace guards requires approval from the Royal Council. These traditions were written into our kingdom's laws by royal decree." The Queen spun around to face him. "Are you questioning my authority, Lord Whitmore?" "I am reminding your Majesty of the laws that govern our kingdom," the old man replied with dignity. "Laws that protect both the crown and the people." Murmurs began spreading through the assembled nobles. Some looked uncomfortable with the Queen's demands, while others seemed to support her desire for change. The division in the room was becoming clear. Young David finally made his choice. With trembling steps, he walked away from the wall and knelt before Queen Saraphina. "Your Majesty," he said in a shaking voice, "I apologize for the delay. I am ready to serve you properly." The Queen smiled coldly at David, then turned back to the others. "At least one guard understands loyalty. The rest of you may leave the palace grounds immediately." As the dismissed guards began to file out, something unexpected happened. Lady Catherine, one of the most respected nobles in the kingdom, stood up from her seat. Then Lord Harrison joined her. One by one, nearly half the nobles in the throne room rose to their feet, not in respect for the Queen, but in support of the guards who were being forced to leave. Queen Saraphina noticed the gesture, and her anger reached a new level. "Sit down! All of you! This ceremony is not over!" But Lady Catherine spoke for the group. "Your Majesty, we have witnessed something today that troubles our hearts. These guards have served our kingdom with honor and courage. To dismiss them for upholding our most sacred traditions seems unwise." The Queen's voice became sharp as a blade. "Unwise? I am trying to bring proper order to this palace. In Astoria, such behavior would never be tolerated." "But this is not Astoria," Lord Whitmore said gently. "This is Eldoria, with its own history, its own values, and its own ways." Marcus watched the scene unfold with a heavy heart. He had never wanted to cause division in the kingdom. He had simply tried to honor his oath and protect the traditions that made Eldoria special. Now he saw nobles arguing, the Queen furious, and young David kneeling alone while his former companions faced exile. As they reached the throne room doors, Marcus turned back one final time. "Your Majesty," he called out, his voice carrying across the now chaotic room, "we harbor no ill will toward you. We simply cannot abandon the principles that have guided us. We wish you and the kingdom nothing but prosperity and peace." Queen Saraphina did not respond, but her cold stare followed them until they disappeared through the doors. Outside the palace, news of the confrontation spread rapidly. Kitchen staff whispered to stable hands, who told the gardeners, who shared the story with merchants in the town square. By afternoon, the entire capital city knew about the dismissed guards and the broken tradition. The reaction from the common people was swift and clear. Crowds began gathering outside the palace gates, not in anger, but in quiet support of the guards. People brought food, offered places to stay, and expressed their gratitude for years of faithful service. Old Martha, who had run the bakery near the palace for 40 years, approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Captain, you and your guards saved my grandson from that fire 3 years ago. You risked your lives without hesitation. The whole kingdom knows your worth." Similar scenes played out throughout the day. The blacksmith whose shop the guards had protected during the robbery. The merchant whose daughter they had rescued from kidnappers. The elderly couple they had helped during the harsh winter floods. Story after story emerged of guards who had served not just the crown, but the people of Eldoria. Inside the palace, Queen Saraphina found herself facing unexpected problems. The remaining guards, those who had not been present during the ceremony, were clearly troubled by what had happened. Some requested transfers to other duties. Others submitted formal complaints through proper channels. The palace staff, from the head cook to the stable master, moved through their duties with unusual quiet. The normal cheerful chatter was replaced by worried whispers. Several longtime servants approached Lord Whitmore privately, expressing their concerns about the direction things were taking. That evening, as the sun set over Eldoria, the dismissed guards gathered in the town square with hundreds of citizens. Not to plot rebellion or spread anger, but simply to share memories of their service and discuss what the future might hold. Thomas raised his mug of ale and spoke to the crowd. "We served with pride, and we leave with pride. Whatever comes next, we can sleep peacefully knowing we honored our oaths." But even as they spoke of acceptance and peace, troubling news arrived. A messenger brought word that several neighboring kingdoms had heard of the day's events. Some expressed concern about the stability of Eldoria's government. Others questioned whether treaties and agreements would remain unchanged under the new queen's rule. Most worrying of all, reports came from the border regions. The castle guards there, upon hearing of the dismissals, were requesting clarification about which orders they should follow. Were the old traditions still valid? Should they change their procedures to match the queen's new demands? Marcus realized that what had started as a simple matter of kneeling or standing had grown into something much larger. The very identity of Eldoria was now being questioned, not just by its own people, but by the wider world. As night fell over the kingdom, nobody could predict what tomorrow would bring. The queen remained firm in her position, the dismissed guards stayed true to their principles, and the people of Eldoria found themselves caught between old traditions and new demands. The kingdom that had known peace and stability for generations suddenly faced an uncertain future, all because of a single moment when conscience met command, and neither would yield. 3 days passed before the true consequences of the throne room confrontation became clear. Queen Saraphina woke to find her breakfast delivered by a nervous young servant instead of the usual cheerful kitchen staff. When she asked why, the servant explained that half the palace workers had requested different duties, unwilling to serve someone who had dismissed the beloved guards. The queen's anger grew throughout the morning as she discovered the extent of the situation. The head gardener had resigned. The stable master was considering leaving. Even the royal seamstress, who had served the palace for 15 years, had submitted notice of her intention to depart. But the most serious news came from Sir Edmund, the royal treasurer. He entered the queen's private chambers with documents that made her face turn pale. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "we have received concerning communications from our trading partners. The merchants from the Crimson Valley are questioning whether existing contracts will be honored. The Kingdom of Westmere has postponed signing the grain agreement. They all cite concerns about stability in Eldoria." Queen Saraphina snatched the papers from his hands, reading with growing dismay. Her actions, intended to establish her authority, were instead undermining confidence in the kingdom itself. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed. "I dismissed a few insubordinate guards, nothing more." Sir Edmund chose his words carefully. "Your Majesty, to the outside world, it appears that Eldoria's most fundamental traditions can be changed without warning or consultation. This raises questions about the reliability of our other commitments." Meanwhile, in the town square, Marcus and his fellow guards had established a temporary headquarters in an old inn. Citizens continued to visit, offering support and sharing news from across the kingdom. The reports painted a troubling picture. Border guards were confused about their duties. Some continued following traditional protocols, while others attempted to implement what they thought were the Queen's new requirements. The inconsistency was causing problems with neighboring countries, who weren't sure how to interact with Eldoria's forces. Elena brought news from her cousin, who worked in the palace laundry. "The Queen barely ate yesterday," she reported. "The servants say she's been pacing her chambers, reading reports and letters until very late at night." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "She's learning that ruling requires more than just giving orders." "But what about us?" Sarah asked. "We can't stay in this inn forever. We have families to support, duties to fulfill." Marcus had been wondering the same thing. He loved Eldoria and wanted to serve his kingdom, but he refused to abandon the principles that made that service meaningful. The answer came from an unexpected source. On the 4th morning, a royal carriage arrived at the inn, but instead of Queen Saraphina, out stepped King Frederick, the Queen's husband, who had been away on diplomatic missions during the entire confrontation. The king was a gentleman, loved by his people for his fairness and wisdom. He had inherited the throne young, and had spent his reign strengthening Eldoria's traditions while slowly modernizing what needed to be changed. His marriage to Saraphina had been both a love match and a diplomatic alliance. "Captain Thornfield," King Frederick said as he approached, "I return to find my kingdom in turmoil and my queen in distress. I believe we need to have a conversation." They sat together in the inn's main room, away from curious ears. The king listened as Marcus explained the events in the throne room, the dismissals, and the growing problems throughout the kingdom. "Your Majesty," Marcus said finally, "we never intended to defy the crown. We simply could not abandon the traditions that define who we are as Eldorians." King Frederick nodded slowly. "Captain, you did exactly what I would have expected from Eldoria's finest guards. The question now is how we move forward without losing face for anyone involved." Over the next several hours, the king met separately with Queen Saraphina, Lord Whitmore, and several other key nobles. These were difficult conversations, filled with hurt pride, wounded feelings, and concerns about the kingdom's future. Queen Saraphina initially resisted any compromise. "I am queen," she insisted to her husband. "I cannot appear weak by reversing my decisions." "My dear," King Frederick replied gently, "true strength sometimes means admitting when we've made mistakes. The greatest rulers in history have been those willing to learn and adapt." He showed her the reports from their allies and trading partners. He explained how the confusion was affecting not just the palace, but the entire kingdom. Most importantly, he helped her understand that Eldoria's traditions weren't arbitrary rules, but foundations that had kept the kingdom stable and prosperous for centuries. That afternoon, the king made an announcement that surprised everyone. He called for a grand assembly, a gathering of nobles, representatives from each town and village, guild leaders, and other important citizens. Such assemblies hadn't been held in 50 years and were reserved for the most crucial decisions affecting the kingdom. "The question before us," King Frederick announced to the packed throne room, "is not whether Queen Saraphina has the authority to change palace protocols. She does. The question is whether such changes serve the best interests of our kingdom." For 2 days, representatives spoke about the importance of traditions, the need for stability, and the value of the guard service. They also discussed how change should happen in Eldoria, gradually with consultation and with respect for the kingdom's heritage. Young David, who had knelt during the original ceremony, asked to speak. His voice shook as he addressed the assembly. "Your Majesties, I knelt because I was afraid. But these past days, I've seen what real courage looks like. Captain Thornfield and the others chose principle over personal safety. They showed me what it truly means to serve Eldoria." Queen Saraphina listened to speech after speech, praising the dismissed guards and expressing concern about rapid changes to fundamental traditions. Slowly, her perspective began to shift. On the final day of the Grand Assembly, she asked to address the gathering. She wore a simple blue dress instead of royal robes, and her voice carried a humility that had been absent before. "Citizens of Eldoria," she began, "I came to this kingdom with love for my husband and hope for my new home, but I also came with assumptions based on my previous experiences. I now understand that what I saw as a simple matter of protocol was actually an attack on the very foundation of your identity." She paused, looking directly at Marcus and his fellow guards, who had been invited to attend. "Captain Thornfield, you and your guards were right to uphold your traditions. In trying to change them without understanding their importance, I showed disrespect not just for the past, but for the values that have made Eldoria great." The Queen took a deep breath before continuing. "I hereby rescind the dismissals of all palace guards. Furthermore, I formally recognize and pledge to honor the ancient tradition that guards of Eldoria stand as protectors, not as servants." The throne room erupted in applause. Marcus felt tears in his eyes as his fellow guards were officially restored to their positions. But Queen Saraphina wasn't finished. However, I also ask for your patience as I continue learning about my new home. I hope to earn your trust and respect through my actions, not through demands for ceremony. In the months that followed, Queen Saraphina proved true to her words. She spent time with palace staff, learning their stories and understanding their roles. She studied Eldoria's history and gradually began suggesting improvements that honored tradition while addressing modern needs. The Queen and the guards developed a mutual respect built on understanding rather than authority. She never again demanded that they kneel, and they never hesitated to serve her with dedication and loyalty. David was quietly transferred to a position where he could rebuild his confidence, while Marcus was promoted to head of palace security, overseeing not just guards, but all safety protocols for the royal family. The neighboring kingdoms, seeing that Eldoria had handled its internal crisis with wisdom and dignity, renewed their agreements and even strengthened their alliances. The kingdom emerged from the confrontation more stable and unified than before. Years later, when visitors asked about the traditions of the Eldorian palace guards, Queen Saraphina would smile and explain how guards who stand tall serve not just the crown, but the eternal principles that make a kingdom truly great. The throne room still echoed with the footsteps of guards who stood proud, traditions that endured, and a queen who had learned that true authority comes not from demanding respect, but from earning it through wisdom, humility, and understanding.